I want to thank you today for joining the webinar, CHRISTUS Predicts the Future and Transforms the Revenue Cycle. CHRISTUS has embarked on a revenue cycle transformation initiative to improve its financial performance and establish the foundation for advantage in a rapidly changing reimbursement environment. They focused on applying predictive analytic technologies for process optimization, seeing this as a core competence to reducing low return efforts, focusing resources, and delivering sustained financial excellence short and long term. Today, you'll learn how CHRISTUS deployed predictive analytics and the benefits in yield rates, cost control, and meeting the needs and issues of each local market. Today's presenters are Casey Orman, who is the Executive Director of Revenue Cycle Services at CHRISTUS Health, and David Franklin, who's the Chief Development Officer here at Conance.
This next slide represents a snapshot of who CHRISTUS Health is. We are among the top 10 Catholic healthcare systems in the United States. We employ 30,000 associates, 9,000 staff positions. We have hospitals in 7 of the U.S. states and Mexico, 175 clinics and outpatient centers. So as a system, we're a very large system. This next slide provides you with an overview of what CHRISTUS Health business operations looked like pre-standardization. This has been a very busy year and a half for our organization. We've had several key initiatives that have been underway. We moved our corporate office functions from several support centers throughout Texas to the Dallas area, and along with that, we made a decision to centralize our business office services to one CBO and relocate that to Irving, Texas as well. So prior to this, we had some inconsistent, very complex processes going on. And as an example, our agencies, our vendor relationships, I should say, were very many. There was no standards in place. The local facilities managed those vendor relationships. We didn't have very good reporting. We really didn't have the control that we felt was needed to manage the performance of either secondary collection agencies, our eligibility companies, and then as well as our own internal collection agency through TLRA. And so we worked with Conance and developed an approach and a strategy that would streamline and provide us with a lot more standardization and a mechanism where we could monitor how our AR was flowing, how accounts were being worked, how effective we were in working our accounts, and understanding what the outcome was. So there was a lot of opportunities that we recognized in working with Conance and understanding what we could do to leverage the data that we had, the processes that we knew we wanted to be more efficient and effective in. And there was a couple of the tools that we've implemented. One is Agency Manager, where we've had, I believe it was 28 secondary bad debt companies that we were outsourcing to across our acute care facilities, and we brought that down to 2. Same thing with eligibility vendors. We now have 2 eligibility vendors, where before it was a mixture and a lot of different processes. In addition to that, we also developed some strategies on how we wanted to handle and process our self-pay patients. Self-pay population with CHRISTUS is pretty significant. A lot of the accounts we were having to flow through the system, but probably not being as efficient and effective in identifying those that had the ability to pay, had the propensity to pay, versus ones that we probably should have reallocated to some type of community benefit. We rolled this product out in March of last year, and by the end of our fiscal year, which was in June, we had seen an additional $4.78 million in additional cash as a result of this. And that was real money. It wasn't a projection. It took about, from the planning stage to the actual implementation stage, it took about 90 days. And then once we got the tool tweaked and up and running, we immediately started seeing an improvement. The other thing that was a positive for us, and I know on the slide we saw neutral or better FTE and postage, but we actually saw a reduction in our postage expense, which is probably the second or third largest expense item for an agency our size. So it has really shown some very beneficial results for our company, and this was strictly on true self-pay. This next slide provides information on how we can compare our secondary agencies, and this is a snapshot of what that performance looked like, comparing vendor A to vendor B, and what the net back amount was over, and looking at it over time. Now, we just went live with the secondary vendors, the new secondary vendors, the latter part of the summer. So it took a little bit of time to get this ramped up, but we're able to see how our companies are performing and what the real results are.
And if I could just add, I think, Casey, as you look at that, the part of Casey's comment is it takes some time to ramp up. What CHRISTUS is now getting is much deeper visibility into that relative performance and some of the underlying performance. And I think where Casey and her team is starting to take this is they're now engaging in different conversations with their secondary bad debt vendors because they have more insights going into those conversations than they used to historically. And so there's an ability to partner with those agencies in a completely new way to understand what's working, what's not, where the opportunities are, and what the challenges are. That creates win-win-win opportunities for CHRISTUS, the agencies, and the CHRISTUS patients.
You're right on, David. I mean, it's actually become a different type of relationship. They're much more engaged in various discussions that we have, whether it is related to performance or new ways to approach how we're approaching the patients. This is related to our denials and predictive logistics on how we're approaching denials. And it's, again, a segmentation based on what we expected to be reimbursed versus what we were actually reimbursed, and whether or not we should continue to pursue an underpayment or a denial. David, you might want to speak a little bit more to the graph.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So in many respects, this is bringing to insurance claims a number of the same concepts you're all familiar with and Casey spoke about in the self-pay world around, call it propensity to pay simplistically. And so what we're doing here is we're data mining historic claim behavior, our ability to overturn claims historically relative to different payers, and coming back with a segmentation scheme which essentially says these claims you're going to be successful with and they're valuable, and at the other end of the spectrum we're saying these are claims which you're highly unlikely to overturn or get additional money from, or if you do get any money from, it's going to be less than your cost to collect. And I think part of that, so a lot of people are surprised we can predict that. I'd say we can actually predict that quite reliably, and that is an interesting thing because there's certainly patterns in that. And as you all think about your relationships with payers, leveraging technology to understand those patterns rather than waiting for the staff to bubble up qualitative examples or one-off examples and aggregating those into a monthly payer review, you can get at insights faster. But the other piece of it is there's absolutely a paradigm shift in here, which is you have to, most people say, look, the payers owe me money, I'm going to go after every last dollar. What we're suggesting here is there's a different way of thinking about that, which is not every dollar is a profitable dollar to collect, and we need to think about either different ways to go after that through different cost structures, whether that's internal or external resources, and kind of changing some of the small balance paradigms that people may have when we're starting to think about those claims that fall at the tail end of the distribution that really are uneconomic to pursue on a traditional kind of one-off follow-up basis. The other piece of this is that the high priority claims do give you a much greater ability to make sure your staff are touching the right claims in the right order to accelerate through the AR and drive down your AR days.
And so what we're sending is our expected reimbursement amount from our contracting modeling system, as well as our 835 and 837s, and then Conus is helping to do their magic in the segmentation based off the results of those different files.
The last thought just on the denials is tying it back to the migration to ICD-10. As you all think about that, and as you read the estimates which are published by quote-unquote experts about what's going to happen, right? The general expectation is that denial rates are going to go through the roof come October, and so you're going to be left with. You currently have constrained resources dealing with your denials and underpayment. Those are going to be exacerbated problems come the fall, and so part of what I think everyone's got to be wrestling with is how do I start to work smarter against that, not only to make sure I'm putting in place my training and education resources to have the best shot of success with ICD-10, but also given the inevitability of the challenges and complexities of that, are there ways that predictive analytic systems can actually help turbocharge your efforts in stabilizing and moving through that incredibly material transition? So let me offer a few thoughts about leveraging predictive analytics. So the first part just here is kind of how do you think about a business case around predictive analytics. As you look at this and you think about how that fits into your organization, every organization is going to need to think about really what their objectives are, what you're trying to accomplish, whether it's more cash or reduced cost. The net of it is, as you think about the gains that come from putting in a system like this, there's certainly going to be hard gains, and this is going to be true whether it's on systems like for patient pay and self-pay or denials analytics. I think the construct is broadly applicable, right? So we can talk about increased cash recovery. Casey talked about the print mail savings that they've had. There's FTE reallocation. So there's a whole set of pieces in there. One which we haven't touched on, but I think is important to think about in some of the hard gains here is employee morale and employee turnover. One of the things that we see across a number of our clients is that as you start to shift their work and give them higher performing accounts to work with, right? You're getting them to talk to the right set of patients. It becomes a more satisfactory job for them, and turnover goes down. And so you're going to end up with hard gains in both cash and operating costs. You're also going to end up with a number of soft gains, which, quite frankly, are hard to measure, and that's why they're soft. But they do play into those things you should be thinking about. And then there's the cost of the system, but overall, those are kind of the pieces as you build towards this. And I think when you start to look at some of the numbers Casey was presenting earlier, some of these ROIs are pretty substantial, and they pay for themselves very quickly, and certainly within the calendar year deployment, and generally much sooner than that, like months. The piece to think about, though, when we talk about analytics, and this is an important point, and one of those lessons we've learned over time doing this, is you can't just think about a model or a score, right? It's it's simple to talk about propensity to pay, or I could talk about the name of our score or any of that. But having a score is not sufficient for success. What you really need to be able to do is operationalize that strategy within the constraints of your operating environment as well as your objective function. So what does that mean, right? So we start with a score that predicts that which we're trying to accomplish, right? So in this case, we're trying to predict whether a patient will pay, how much they'll pay, and how are they going to engage in the collection process. Or in the denials arena, we're trying to predict will the payer pay us more money on a denied claim and how much that'll be. We then have to take that and say, okay, so given that information and given that prediction, what are we trying to do, right? Do we want to try and collect more cash and we're willing to invest against that? Or how much are we willing to invest for that? Do we want to take cost out of our overall system and redeploy FTEs? Do we want to accelerate accounts through our AR? And then we have to design that work strategy consistent with those objectives that also meets your specific capabilities. So in the self-pay arena, right, do you have the ability to do blast messages, or do you have predictive dialing? What are your policies and procedures? And kind of put all that together so that we design a robust program that's working through each segment and each of those strategies appropriately with the right set of activities, the right messages, and the right timing. And then the other piece of that is we then have to monitor success and have a feedback loop. So you saw some of the reporting and some of those pieces that Casey, just scratched the surface of in terms of what we do and what you want to look at. But it's really important to monitor this, right? We know that the environment continues to change. It's dynamic. We know that there are changes which occur amongst your staff, right? Whether it's turnover or sick days or what have you, which lead to, getting behind in a backlog or, less productive efforts in the case of new employees. And how do we think about all that? So we stay on top of the program and we react to changes and we continue to maximize cash or, cost as the case may be. The other thought I'd leave you here with, and I think you've kind of heard it through the comments we've had about self-pay strategies as well as claim strategies, which is we spend an awful lot of time thinking about cash, more so than percentages, right? So propensity to pay, things like that are fundamentally, a percentage number. What's the likelihood of this patient making a payment? That would be, right, a likelihood. While that's helpful, we don't think it's actually sufficient, nor do we think it's completely consistent with your incentives and kind of what you're trying to do, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you don't put percents into the bank account. You actually put dollars into the bank account. And so what we're trying to do here is actually try and help organizations collect more dollars and understand how many dollars you're willing to invest to collect those dollars. And so that's really sort of a collection ROI framework, if you will. And in knowing kind of what the collection opportunity on the table is, then you can make a choice about how much you're willing to invest relative to your overall budget constraints. And so that fundamentally allows us to, manage within the constrained budgets everyone has, and to drive lift, and to make sure that for every scarce resource that you have, whether that's a person making a phone call, receiving a phone call, or mailing a statement, that we're able to optimize the overall portfolio returns, right? Because we understand what's my next best action, right? What's the next best phone call to make? Where am I likely to get that highest return? And you can really do that when you start thinking about cash value as part of the equation.